Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good Tavach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC, and it is in honor and memory of Rav Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Shalom, Rav Moshe Pinchas HaKoyen Katz Olav Shalom, and Rav Yoel HaKoyen Khan Olav Shalom. It's also in schus and merit of Rav Zev Yecheskel HaKoyen and Risha Katz Le'erich Yomim V'Shanim Tevis for many long, healthy years. So we're coming to the close, the end of Perek Yud Beis, chapter 12, the chapter about the Beinoni. This paradoxical and dual characteristic individual who on one hand has a divine soul and an animal soul. Both are active. Both have a voice. Two kings. On the other hand, it is the divine soul that controls, for all practical purposes, the governance of the small city, which is the body, and the thought, speech, and action of the human being. Machshava dibra ma'aseh. But it goes back and forth, because on one hand, the faculties of the animal soul are active. But at the same time, the Beinoni also has a divine soul that's even more powerful. And when you throw into the equation a few other factors, that there's davening, that during davening there's a surge, an additional strength that the person has because it's a shas hakosher, it's an auspicious moment, auspicious time of moichin the godless, as we learned. And we also have the innate ava mesuteres, the love and reverence that is inherent in each person. And then we have the moich shal talav, which is also inherent. That's what gives the Beinoni all the resources needed, which just demonstrates that this is within reach of each one of us. That's why later we'll learn Midas HaBeinoni is Midas Kol Adam V'Acharei Kol Adam Yimshach. Every person has access to this. However, one of these three is not enough. You need all of them. Because you could have innate love and reverence, Ava and Yirat Hashem. The Rosh also has innate love, Ava and Yirat Hashem. But he's not exercising his Moich Shal Talalev. The Moich Shal Talalev is what is necessary, that when a thought, speech, or word, or action from the animal soul arises, that it should be subdued and not allowed to affect the person, as we'll soon discuss in more detail. So the Moich Shal Talalev plays a critical role. But it's not alone. Later we're going to learn, because we also have it within us. So it's not just the inherent self-control. There is actually love of God that's inherent in the person. And then davening, of course, brings it all to a whole new dimension. But davening alone, we don't daven all day. After davening, like he explained, when the animal soul is not even able to voice its opinion, but after davening, that power diminishes, so now the animal soul is active again. So then come the other two factors, the natural love and reverence that we have, and particularly Moich Shal Talalev, and the Reishim that's left from davening, the effect, the after effect, that gives the power to be able to really control and govern the city, the small city, which is the body, the thought, speech, and action. So that's in brief the back and forth. To read it inside, we learned last week, and I'll just go over it again. It's always worthwhile reviewing again. So what he says is like this. After explaining what the power of self-control, so then the Alter Rebbe says, so the Beinoni therefore is controlling thought, speech, and action. And just like the natural dominance and superiority of light over darkness is the natural superiority of Chochmah over Sichlis. The Chochmah of what? Of the divine soul over the foolishness and nonsense of the animal soul. And nevertheless, he's not called at all a tzaddik. Why? Because this Yisren that the divine soul has over the darkness, the light of the divine soul has over the darkness and foolishness of the klipa, is only in the garments. It's not actually affected the very core essence of the animal soul's personality and faculties. Because it was not pushed aside after davening. Because the fiery passion that was there during davening is not there in the right side of the heart after davening. What do we have then? We do have the Ava Mesoteres, the Techerotzuf Ava Mesoteres. We still have the plated, the covering that comes from the hidden love, which is natural love of the divine soul, as we discussed, and we shall explain later in chapter 19, chapter 44. And that's why Yochelias, Vazai Yochelias, Sichlus Achsil, Harab is Galus B'chol Asmoli. After davening. That foolishness or that distraction or that animal soul's desires can be alive and revealed. To desire from all the desires and pleasures of this world. Both permissible and that which is permitted, God forbid. As if he didn't daven. What does that mean? We know that the davening does have an effect. However, that passion that he had during davening, that's as if it's gone. And that's why he's contending with this animal soul. In the example with the two kings, during davening, the other king is like, so to speak, asleep. He's not challenging you. He's there. But anyway, right now the divine soul is in control. After davening, that animal soul gets reawakened and therefore speaks up. However, when it comes to something prohibited, it doesn't even arise in his mind to do something. God forbid. However, what does exist? Hidhuri Aveda. Thoughts of Aveda, that in a certain way are koshim Aveda, as we discussed, because it consumes the person, it obsesses the person and distracts us. So it has a certain power that's even stronger than a sin itself. Not the very pollution or the toxins, but the fact how it affects the gavra of the person. So these thoughts that are coming from the animal soul are able to go up to the mind and distract him, confuse him, and distract him from Teir and Aveda. U'kamayim Razal, Sholosh Avedas Einodem Nitzel Mehem B'chol Yom, Hirur Aveda Ve'ir and Tefillah Chulu. So he's proving that there are things we can't protect ourselves from, the inadvertent thoughts that come from the animal soul, because the animal soul is existent and active. However, I could then continue. However, the trace in the mind that remains from davening, the Yiras Hashem, the Rishim Meichin that remains from davening. Let's first cover that. Something remains. An effect, when you're passionate about something, even though the passion itself is as if you didn't daven, it's not the passion, but something remains, a memory, an effect. So he says that's one thing. Additionally, there's the hidden, inherent love and reverence and awe that the person has in the right side of the heart. So that gives the power. So even this voice that has now returned from the animal soul, you have the power to control it. to control this desire, the hirhuri avera. Shaloi liyas leishlitu mamshala be'ir lohetzi taivose mekeach alapeil. That there should be no control. It has a voice. Like we discussed, the example you can have in two opposition parties in the government. And the opposition party has a voice, but they don't have a way to rule by that voice. They can voice, but then they can be outnumbered and controlled, subdued. So it doesn't have shlita mamshala, lohetzi, taivasa mekeach alapeil. To bring that inadvertent thought, hirhuri aveda, from potential to actualization. Lislabish be'evri aguf. That not. Like we said earlier, because he controls his thought. But you just said hirhuri aveda, he doesn't control. Ein adam nitzalman, a person can't stop that. So the Alter Rebbe continues. Vafilu b'meach, levade lahar bara. Even in the meach, alone, to contemplate, laharir, to have bad thoughts, ein leshlita memshala, laharir chaz v'shalom. He does not have control to think, but it's seinei shebemeche, with a desire. Sheikabel berotzen, that he should actually willingly receive and accept and embrace this bad thought, God forbid. Hiru zehara ha'ele me'lov ma'lev l'meach. So it's not subtle, but it's a critical distinction. So to have inadvertent thoughts, we have no control because that's the animal soul's nature. It's going to sense us thoughts to us. But because of the Me'ich Sha'al Ta'alev, empowered by the trace that remains from the davening, empowered by the inherent love and awe in the person and reverence in the person, so it affects that we shouldn't even have a machshava, which means willingly embrace this. And that's why he says, the earlier he said, he has the power, the natural power of Me'ich Sha'al Ta'alev, of self-control. May love, that which comes inadvertently, you can't stop. Just like, for example, a person that when you get hungry, you can't stop from getting hungry. It's the way the human body was created. And it's, matter of fact, a healthy thing. You should know you're hungry and you have to eat. But how are you going to eat? Are you going to indulge when you get hungry? Or are you going to use you're going to eat the l'shem shamayim like we learned earlier in Tanya? So here too, you can't control the inadvertent thought, the hirur aveda. Ein adam nitzel mehen b'chol yom. Three things that a person cannot stop, cannot save themselves, cannot control. So what's the dynamics of this? Says the Alter Rebbe, elamiyad bal yosei l'sham. You can't stop the blood rushing from the heart to the brain. You can't stop the desire, the inadvertent thought, the hirur aveda from the animal soul to the mind of the person. But as soon, miyad bal yosei l'sham, which came by me'elov, automatically, inadvertently, what does he do? Deiche b'shtei yadayim. He dismisses it. He pushes it aside with both hands, which is an expression which means vigorous. Completely pushes it aside, not just with one hand. Umasiach daitei miyad sheniskeshu hirura. And as soon as he realized miyad shenisker, that's a bad thought, he pushes it aside. He averts his mind. Asiach das, he distracts himself and averts his mind, like we learned earlier, to something else, especially to something of dusha. Ve'ena mekable berotzen. And he refuses to willingly embrace this thought. Afilu laharer be'berotzen. Now he says, even in hirur, the part of the hirur that's not in his control, that he does not have control over. But even any hirur, berotzen, not even to fantasize it about it deliberately. So here he distinguishes. You could have a hirur that you think about something negative, but you're not thinking of doing it. Or you could have a thought to do it and still not doing it. Or you could have the earliest stage, which is inadvertent. So if you want to really break it down into steps, think of it this way. Person's walking in the street, or whatever, daydreaming, or whatever it is. The animal soul awakens a negative thought. This is inadvertent. It's not up to you. Ein adam nitzal man b'chol yom. Gimel dvarim. Hiruri aveda. And you're not thinking about doing anything. It's just a thought. As soon as you're aware, says the Beini, as soon as the Beini is aware of this thought, he pushes it aside and averts his mind to something else. He doesn't even want to think the concept. And for sure not to act on it. That's called machshava. That means he's in control of his thought. To speak and act, for sure not. But even in machshava, and even in hirur, just even to think about it, as soon as he realizes something, he just pushes it aside. He doesn't say, since it's inadvertent, let me really continue to think. No, as soon as he can, he moves his mind to something else. And definitely doesn't willingly dwell on it, and definitely doesn't willingly dwell on it to act on it. So all of this is negated from the Beinoni. And then he adds, or yafilu l'daber boy, or even to talk about it, which is of course even more involvement. And dibur already is not inadvertent, that's already deliberate. Ki hamaharer b'rotzen, for someone who deliberately fantasizes, someone who deliberately thinks about, nikra Rasha b'eisisha. He's called a Rasha that moment. And the Beini is not a Rasha, even for a single moment, as we learned. So the Hirur Aveda, that inadvertent thought for however long it lasts, that doesn't make him into a Rasha, because that's not in his control. But as soon as he's aware of it, and should he let it himself dwell on it, when he's aware willingly, that already would render him into a Rasha, not a Beini. That's what the Alter Rebbe says. So this teaches us, you see, the extent of how the Alter Rebbe is teaching us self-mastery. How to control yourself, discipline. What it means to be a disciplined human being. A person who's a servant of Hashem. So of course there are many levels. Even in the Beini itself there are many levels. But you see, when you dissect it, we don't take anything for granted. How many things that we do in our lives, we don't think about it. Obviously we stay away from things that are really terrible. But other things, okay, it happens. The Alter Rebbe here is now 24/7 of vigilance. Think of the vigilance that's needed here. Creating such a standard. Because when you are in a true relationship with Hashem, every little thing matters. It's not like, okay, who cares? She had a negative thought. I didn't think of acting on it anyway. But it just shows you how a person directs themselves and disciplines themselves to become a person that's a godly person. And we're still talking about the Beinoni. The Beinoni. So all this is now, till now we've spoken about Ben Odom Lamokim. Talked about davening. Talked about Avos Hashem, Yiras Hashem, negative thoughts, positive thoughts. The truth is, he didn't spell out. It really means everything. But now, in the next piece, which is the end of the Perek, Alter Rebbe is now going to apply it to human interactions with a short introduction. We know the whole Torah mitzvahs breaks into two categories: Ben Odom Lamokim and Ben Odom Lechavere. Ben Odom Lamokim means the things that we do between Mokim, also Mokim Shalom, the Eberster. This includes davening, Shabbos, Kashrus. But then there's Ben Odom L'Chavere, how human beings interact with each other. Avos Yisrael is, of course, the classic. The truth is, Avos Yisrael is the rubric for Kol HaTorah mitzvahs, but specifically, Hachnos Esarchim, Tzedakah. Ben Odom L'Chavere. That's in the positive. In the negative, things we should not do to each other. We should not treat each other. le'signev, le'sirtzach. All the second half of the 10 Commandments of the Aseres HaDibros are beinodem lechavere. The first half are beinodem lemokim. So the Alter Rebbe is now going to spell it out. Being that Tanya is a practical blueprint, a practical guide of how to live our lives, so Alter Rebbe covers all the aspects of life. And that's what the next section is going to concern itself with. The dvorim shebein adam lechavere. So let's continue learning now. We're learning now, as I said, Perikut Beis, closer to the end. So now he says like this: V'chein bedvorim shebein adam lechavere. And so too is it in human relationship that, just as we said, the self-control that the Beinoni exhibits in his service of God, and how he deals with negative thoughts and pushes it away, that there's never any deliberate negative thought or negative word or negative action, as we learned at length. Same as Beinoni lechavere. Now what? He uses now the same expressions. Before he used the words, let's to compare. He said, Miyad be'al yosel l'sham. As soon as there's a hirura, any negative thought, he pushes it aside. That's what the Beinoni does. They say the same thing here. Miyad she'elu la ma'alev l'mayach. As soon as a negative thought arises from his heart, remember the impulsive heart, the left side of the heart where the animal soul resides, and from there to the moyach, to the person's mind. Any ill will, tina, and sinna, or hatred. So tina, you can say, is somewhat of a smaller form of sinna. So as soon as it arises, miyad, any tina v'sinna chaz v'shalom, God forbid, what happens? The Alter Rebbe adds more before he tells us what happens. Oi, he wants to cover every scenario. Oi ezekina, oi kas, oi kpeda. So we're going to have here 5 different things v'dei mehen. So let's translate. Ezekina, any thoughts of envy, kina, jealousy, envy. Oikas, or anger. Oikpede, or resentment. Udemein, and similar to that. So we have here, let's go, tina sina, which is ill will or hatred. Then jealousy, envy, anger, or resentment. So what does this Beinoni do? A thought has arisen. As soon as something like that goes from the left to the meyach, he categorically refuses to embrace this thought in his mind and his will. Here it's interesting, he says, before he says, the desire in the mind needs to be looked at. But let's first understand this. Because, as we said before, nothing willing. We're not talking about something that's not in your control. He doesn't address here whether we have control. When you say Hirra Veda, that's Ein Adam Nitzlamem, does that include Ben Adam L'Chavere? Most likely, yes. The animal soul can cause a tinge or something that's not deliberate, inadvertent, negative thought to another person. But he's not mekabel it. That's the key. I don't accept it. B'meichei b'ritzeinei. In some places, it's explained the difference between kas and kpeda, because anger and resentment may sound similar. So it says that kas is belev, kas is emotional, and kpeda is in the mind. Sometimes a person has anger, emotional anger to someone else, rage or anger. Kpeda is more like a resentment. You resent another person. Resentment is not jealousy. That was what he said before. So you have 5 different categories. Now, why the Alter Rebbe chose dafka these 5, not more, not less, and in this order, that needs to be analyzed. I have not seen commentaries speak about it. You go back to the end of chapter 1 when he talks about the Dal Yesed Haroim, the 4 negative elements and human personality characteristics. He speaks about some of these, and perhaps you can connect it to that to establish the order or the difference between them. But that's something that I believe for the discussion. Just to go there, what did he say there? There he said, Yesod Eish. From the element of fire, we have kas and gaiva. Here he doesn't mention gaiva, because he's talking about lechavere. Even though gaiva affects another person, but kas he does mention there. Then he talks about taivas atainugim. So there again, that's more pleasures, not so much in affecting another than helus latzonis v'spirus and atzvus v'atzvus. The truth is only one thing that he does mention that overlaps kas. But here clearly you're talking about direct impact on another, not just bad characteristics or desires or pleasures or arrogance. So the order again is what? Tina v'sina, ill will and hatred. Then jealousy, or eze kas, eze kina, or kas, or kpeda. Any envy, anger, or resentment. So eine makablan kal b'meche b'ritzene, as we learned before. But 1 minute here. There's more than that. It's not just about repressing negative thoughts. Remember, the Beinoni also has his divine soul dominates. He's not just playing defense. There's an offense going on. So what? There's more. We know there's moyach shal tal lev. Not just to repress. So he continues. Va'adarabe. And on the contrary, hamoyach shalit umoishel beruach shebeliboy. His mind, the mind of the Beinoni, controls and dominates the spirit, the inclination of the heart. Lases hahepach mamish. To do exact opposite of what his inclination was. His inclination may have been ill will, or hatred, or envy, or jealousy, envy, anger, or resentment. To do the exact opposite. Lisnag im chavere, b'midas chesed v'chibi yeseder medasle. To act in a kind way toward this individual, showing him extra affection, extra love. So not just is repressing the negative thoughts. And he concludes, this is the last lines of the Perek, which we'll read and then we'll review the next year, to the extent, Lizbel mimenu, at k'tzei achren. Now goes even further. Not just that he treats him nicely, but he tolerates to the extreme limits the antagonism of the other person, even if the other person is hurting him. Without becoming angry, God forbid. And also to refrain from repaying him in kind. Even if it's just desserts in kind. God forbid. But on the contrary, repay the guilty with positive acts. Like the Zeir explains, how we learn from Yosef, how he treated his brothers, even though they had treated him in such a terrible way, how he ended up treating them with such chesed and kindness. And that's how the Alter Rebbe concludes the Perek. We'll stop here due to time limit, but we'll discuss this last piece in the next year. Everyone have a good tavach. Be well.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit chasidusapplied.com for archived classes and more resources.